They called on the armed forces to abandon the president and to allow humanitarian aid into the country.
They can't take away our right to protest, these Venezuelans in the capital Caracas chant. They're referring to the government of President Nicolas Maduro. Lilian Tintori is one of the protesters. She's the wife of a prominent opposition leader who has been in jail for 4 years. She told DW it was time for a new government.
Stop Maduro as an usurper. The transition to have free and fair election. This is why we are protesting for this.
Tintori and many of these protesters are supporting Juan Guaido, who proclaimed himself interim president last week. The country's chief prosecutor has opened an investigation into his challenge for power.
I'm not underestimating the threat of jail, and I don't want it to be understood like that. Very responsibly, I say there is nothing new coming from a regime that doesn't answer to the Venezuelan people's needs. Their only response is repression and persecution.
Venezuelan authorities are accusing him of helping foreign countries, such as the US, to interfere in internal matters. Washington recognizes Guaido's claim to lead Venezuela. On Wednesday, President Donald Trump phoned him to reiterate his support. For his part, President Maduro tried to convince Americans that intervention would backfire on them.
I call upon your conscience. I call upon your solidarity. Be aware of the truth. We must not allow a second Vietnam to happen, this time in Latin America. If the US intervenes, it will be worse for them than Vietnam.
According to a Russian news agency, Maduro has offered to negotiate with the opposition in an attempt to regain support domestically. But talks are not what these protesters want.
Our people, all the people in Venezuela support Juan Guaido. Listen, Guaido, Guaido, Guaido.
Their demand is clear. Maduro must go.
For more on the crisis in Venezuela, I'm joined now by Dr. Peter Birle, a political scientist and Latin American analyst from the Ibero-American Institute here in Berlin. Thanks for being with us this morning, Professor. Now, the crisis in Venezuela seems to be coming to a head. There's been a mass exodus from the country. The economy is on its knees, and dozens of countries are no longer recognizing Maduro as president. How long can Nicolas Maduro hold on?
Quite a lot of time, as long as he doesn't lose the support of the country's army, and if he doesn't lose the support of China and Russia, and most important perhaps, if he doesn't lose support of his Chavista basis in the country's population. So this will be one of the biggest questions of the next days, if the opposition really is able to organize new mass protests, and so this might at one point bring Maduro to step down.
The world's attention is now fixed on Juan Guaido, the opposition figure who heads Venezuela's National Assembly and says he is now the country's legitimate president. The U.S. and nearly 50 other countries have now recognized Guaido as the legitimate president. Is Guaido capable of pushing Maduro out?
Not alone, so because he has no real power. The whole state apparatus is in the hands of the regime. So he only can trust in the support of the people. He can, of course, trust also in international support for what he is trying to do. But he alone, without the help of the army, will not be able to do what he wants to do.
I want to talk a little about Juan Guaido for a moment, because there is so much attention on him right now. A lot is riding on him. What kind of leader is he, and what could we expect from him if he were to take control of the country?
He's a young man. He comes from a rather modest family background. His father's a taxi driver, and so he's not part of the traditional oligarchy. He is quite clever in using the social media. He is acting in a calm way. So I think he's doing what he really can do. What can we expect? Well, he has announced that the most important thing would be Well, first, that Maduro has to step down, then to organize a transitional government, to organize a situation that allows humanitarian help for the people, because they are suffering, and then create the conditions for free and fair election, then, of course, organize these elections.
Now, let's talk about the U.S., too, because they're playing a role in all of this. We're hearing Donald Trump talking a lot about what's going on in Venezuela. The U.S. is bringing all the power it has to bear in this crisis, short of military intervention. Briefly, if you can, what are U.S. interests in Venezuela?
That's true. The United States has been stepping in quite strongly in the last few days. That's also one of the risks for Maduro, because he must not seem to be a puppet of the Trump administration. That would mean that he would lose.
You mean?
Guaido, of course, yes, because then he would lose the support of the Venezuelan people. So what are the United States' interests? Of course, the United States is interested in a stable and non-socialist Venezuela, and then there are the oil interests. Venezuela is a market for exports, for imports, and so basically this would be it.
Okay. Professor, thank you so much. Dr. Peter Birle from the Ibero-American Institute here in Berlin. Thanks for talking with us this morning on DW News.
Pleasure.
For more, return to former Democratic Congressman from Florida, Alan Grayson. Thank you for joining us, Congressman.
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay, so what do you make of President Trump's decision to actually recognize a Venezuelan opposition leader, Juan Guaido, as interim president, rather than the one that is sitting in office right now?
I think it's not the right thing to do. I well understand the tragedy that is befalling the Venezuelan people. Their inflation last week was 200%, not 200% a year, 200% for the week. Prices tripled in Venezuela last week, and 10% of the population has simply left because they can't feed themselves any longer in Venezuela. It's probably the second worst government in the world after North Korea, but nevertheless, saying that a person is in charge of the Venezuelan government when he's not in charge of the Venezuelan government, it's lip service, it's ineffective, it doesn't solve anyone's problems.
Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also backed up the president. Has called on Latin American governments to recognize Guaido as Venezuelan interim president. And he promised aid from the U.S. in a full-blown... Is this full-blown support for regime change? It's kind of like bribing other countries to get on board to overthrow a government.
I think that each country is entitled to make its own decision about this, but the term recognition has an almost Orwellian sense to it. It's clear that Maduro, for better or for worse, is still in charge of the Venezuelan government. So to say that we recognize somebody who is not in charge of the government as the person who's in charge of the government is feckless.
Well, that's the thing. I recognize your empathy and your sympathy for the people of Venezuela and the plot that they're having. Would there be a better way that the U.S. could handle this situation rather than just getting involved as directly as they're doing?
Well, there's three things that actually would probably lead to a regime change. One of them is to organize an embargo against Venezuelan oil being exported, and another one is to organize an embargo against the incoming military weapons that could potentially be used against the population. And the third thing that could be done is to support the free flow of ideas and alternative media for people in Venezuela. All three of those things would be constructive, and all three of those things would possibly lead to a better government for Venezuela.
Well, it's interesting that this all once again centers around oil, like so many of our turmoils around the world is happening right now. Do you think, with the president being so closely tied to people like Jared Kushner, John Bolton, and others who have made it very apparent that they are friends and allies with Saudi Arabia, do you think Saudi Arabia is playing any role in the reason why the president is getting involved with this, considering Saudi Arabia is probably one of the #1 competitors of oil with Venezuela around the world?
I think that the primary motivation here is sort of left over from the Cold War. It's that Maduro and his predecessor, Chavez, both identified themselves as socialists, and therefore right-wingers in the United States, like John Bolton, feel compelled to attack them until they're defeated. I think that's what we're actually seeing as the real motivation. I don't think Saudi Arabia would have any real way to weigh in on this, and it wouldn't have much of an impact on what Saudi Arabia gets for its oil, because all you'd see is a sort of a shuffling around. If we organize sanctions against Venezuela, for instance, we'd probably end up keeping more of the oil that we produce in Alaska instead of exporting it.
Okay, so now what role should Congress have in any of this U.S. involvement in Venezuela with such a openly diplomatic message sent around the world that obviously England, France, other countries have fallen in line behind? Shouldn't there have been some sort of assessment with Congress involved or some sort of asking for their involvement before the president made such a direct announcement?
Yes, I was involved in the organization of sanctions against Iran that brought Iran to the table and led to the agreement that was signed between Iran and the United States with other parties. The Foreign Affairs Committee in the House is very active in such areas and could help to organize, if it were deemed appropriate, organize a boycott of Venezuelan oil and prevention of the Venezuelan military from being able to get supplies, ammunition, weapons, and so on.
Now, some might say that it's actually better that the president and his staff did this so openly when in the past we've seen administrations do it kind of behind the scene and endorse regime changes, whether we're talking about Libya or other involvements around the country. So should there at least be the lemonade out of the situation is the fact that, well, at least we know that he's doing this out in front instead of going behind the scenes and making this more something that we don't find out about till years after or until we're actually in a full-fledged war with our military involved.
Well, I think that the main effect of this is to inflame Maduro supporters because there's a long history of U.S. intervention not only in Venezuela but around Latin America, which is generally not well regarded by Latin Americans. We intervened 4 times in a row in elections in the Dominican Republic, for instance. To give you one example, the United States supported dictatorship in Venezuela, military dictatorship, for many years. And there is a broad sentiment in many parts of Latin American society that we should mind our own business. So the direct effect of Trump doing this will be to possibly strengthen the current government.
Well, that's my question for you, Congressman Gray. At this point, our government is shut down because the president is wanting to build a wall. And because of these caravans and the unrest that are going in a lot of these Latin American, South American countries. Won't this, by encouraging this kind of unrest within a country, doesn't this kind of bolster a reason why people are fleeing countries from this instead of necessarily encouraging something that will bring confidence and calm to the streets of countries? Isn't this President Trump kind of creating more of a problem that he says he's trying to solve by creating a wall and keeping our government shut down?
Well, the one concrete thing that we could do that would enormously alleviate the suffering would be to provide temporary protected status to Venezuelans who are in the United States. There are hundreds of thousands. Out of the 3 million that have left Venezuela, there are hundreds of thousands that would be benefiting from temporary protected status. I asked President Obama to convey that, and the answer came back, well, they're economic refugees, not political refugees. And apparently, unfortunately, President Trump has adopted the same view. But we have a very large Venezuelan American population and a Venezuelan population in Florida, and they suffer tremendously with the thought that as soon as their visa's over, they have to go home and reap the real whirlwind.
You know what? You bring up a great point now. It'd be interesting to see if President Trump will now consider these to be political refugees and is seeking political asylum, which would definitely change the status of their visas. Thanks for joining us, Congressman.
You're welcome. Thank you, too.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.
From the national headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and here we go again. Tonight, there is trouble brewing between the United States and Russia on the question of Venezuela. President Trump, with the support of Republican lawmakers, is sending signals that the United States will interfere in Venezuela's internal politics, and they're talking about doing something like this brazenly, publicly. The Trump administration, who has said that they are considering military options in Venezuela, is actually signaling this week that even though Nicolas Maduro was sworn in already as the president of Venezuela, we are not going to recognize him. We will recognize his opposition instead. That's what our government is saying. Now, regardless of what you may think of Venezuela and its very left-leaning politics, and trust me, there's plenty to question there, we still have to ask ourselves if it's the U.S.'s place to go around the world choosing another country's president, right? After all, isn't that what the United States media spends the majority of its time talking about these days? Whether Russia stuck its nose in our politics here in the United States? Here's Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov sending Washington today what appears to be almost a warning.
This is all very alarming and shows that in the United States, the policy of destabilizing countries in Latin America and in other regions remains one of its main priorities.
So Russia appears to be using the U.S.'s threats in Venezuela as leverage somehow, right? That's what it seems like, right? Why, you might ask? And why don't they just stay in their own corner of the world? And what business do the Russians have sticking their nose in Latin America, which is much closer to the U.S. border than it is to any borders in Asia, right? That's a good question. But you see, the Russians would argue that they could ask the same questions of us. Let me give you a little bit of a Russian perspective on this, something you would probably not get or consider. For hundreds and hundreds of years, Russians have tried minding their own business and have always ended up being fooled, invaded, and or lied to. So much so that people who study the Russian culture will tell you that it's almost like it's like baked into their psyche, right? Almost a little defensive about it now. The most recent example for this is the question of NATO. The Russians have not been allowed to join NATO, even though they've asked. Vladimir Putin himself has gone to NATO and says, please let us be a part of the organization. And they've said, no, you're not allowed. While NATO has encroached right up against the Russian border, despite being promised by the United States that that would never happen. Not going to happen, we said. That promise actually took place. I can give you the exact date. It took place on February 9th of 1990. So the Bush administration tells Mikhail Gorbachev on that day that in exchange for cooperation on, reunifying Germany, remember the wall and the whole thing? The U.S. would give its, this is a direct quote, ironclad guarantee that NATO will not expand 1 inch eastward past Germany. That's what they said, not 1 inch. Those are, again, that's a direct quote from the documents that were looked at, signed, the conversations that took place. So what happened after that? Come with me. I want to go to the wall and I want to show you something so you can kind of understand how this all works. NATO, at the U.S.'s urging, not only did they expand, they've taken it right to the Russian border. Let me show you something. All right, let's go in on this and okay, so all this red here is obviously Russia. There is Estonia and Latvia. Everything you see in green here is NATO, right? So here's Estonia and Latvia right up against the Russian border, right? Look, it's as if Iran or China or Russia itself had troops right on our border with Mexico. Now that would be a national emergency. And now NATO is actually making, here, come back here, I want to show you something. NATO is actually making overtures now with Ukraine. So they're knocking on the door with Ukraine, asking them if they want to also be included with NATO. And look what happens there. Look at this border. There's Russia. I mean, talk about, might Russia feel a little bit surrounded? Wouldn't you? Might they be asking, giving the United States a taste of their own medicine with Mr. Lavrov's comments about the U.S. interference in Venezuela? Is that what's really going on here? We ask. It's no doubt a question that is worth asking. This is The News with Rick Sanchez, where we try to ask the questions that might sometimes give you a different perspective, one maybe you've never considered, because we really do believe it's time to do real news again.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.
Moving on to our top story this hour, however, we look to Venezuela, which announced this week it will drop the U.S. dollar in trade transactions. Venezuela's industry minister, Tarek Al-Assami, made the announcement Tuesday, saying the country will no longer submit to any monetary domination as U.S. intervention.
All transactions in the domestic exchange market will be referenced using the euro and other convertible currencies. We return to the scheme of the euro. The best help they can give the people of Venezuela is that imperialism pulls its murderous and criminal claws out of the country and let us be free. We will not be anyone's colony again.
With Venezuela and the dollar in question, we turn to former UK Member of Parliament George Galloway to discuss. George, what do you think is driving this? First of all, do you get a sense that in Europe and the UK as well, there's a sense of frustration about being tied to the U.S. dollar?
Well, there's nothing so powerful as the power of an idea whose time has come. And the idea of breaking free of the hegemony of the U.S. dollar is now everywhere, even in the most unlikely places. We've discussed before the foreign minister of Germany, once upon a time a client state of the United States, which is now openly searching for an alternative to dollarization in international trade. And this has spread, of course, farther and farther as the number of countries under sanctions and aggression of one kind or another at the hands of the US has literally multiplied. If you think about it, countries that are either sanctioned or threatened with sanction, why would they take the risk of continuing to rely on the US dollar, which is being used in such a politicized way? So Iran is under sanctions. Why would it trade in dollars, therefore? Why would Russia and China trade with each other or elsewhere in dollars when they are the subject of trade war and sanctions from the United States? And Venezuela is the latest to conclude that such is the level of aggression coming out of Washington, such is the obvious regime change appetite in Washington, that they might as well bite the bullet and buck the dollar.
Considering how the U.S. reacted, though, to, for example, Saddam Hussein when he adopted the euro over the dollar several decades ago, what is Venezuela risking with this decision?
Well, of course, there's a big risk in it, but the level of enmity coming from Washington towards Venezuela has now reached the point of no return. So I think the conclusion is we'd be better hung for a sheep than a lamb, as we say here. The people in Venezuela know that they are on the end of yet another U.S. regime change operation. So they might as well stand up, do the principled thing, and like the Iraqi leaders and the Libyan, by the way, which also sought to break away from the dollar, they risk, of course, being overthrown. But it's not as if that risk disappears if they don't take this step. I was actually in Baghdad. I was talking with members of the former leadership of Iraq when this move was being discussed. I did point out to them at the time that the US would regard it as a red line. But times have changed, and the number of US opponents, stroke enemies, has multiplied in that time. For a start, Russia, at the time that Iraq was under attack from the US, was more or less in an interregnum. Russia is now in the Axis full time. And so the number of countries and the importance of the countries in the crosshairs of United States hegemony has multiplied. And that paradoxically, or if you like in a contradictory way, has strengthened the hands of those who are on the end of American aggression. There's more of them. They're more important than they were before.
And a lot of these countries, for example, Iran and Venezuela, produce oil, and the dollar is currently the standard currency used to trade that commodity, as well as, for example, gold. But do you think that could change? And if so, what would replace it?
Well, if you are Iran under sanctions and you're selling oil to China, which is under trade war from Donald Trump, why on earth would you trade in dollars? What do dollars have to do with it? The dollar could be an international reserve currency, the international reserve currency, if it wasn't being used in a politicized way. But it's quite obvious that it is, and therefore, why use it? The Chinese currency is very important, very strong. Russia's relationship with China means that the ruble is a strong currency. India, which is under threat of sanction from the United States over buying Russian military equipment, is a rising superpower in the international economy. Again, why should any of them bother with dollars?
All right, we'll leave it there for now. It's definitely a trend that is catching on worldwide. We'll see how long the dollar lasts then. Former UK MP George Galloway, thanks a lot.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.
But first, a years-long economic crisis in Venezuela has that country in a steep downward spiral. Violence rocked the nation earlier this year as President Nicolas Maduro pushed through controversial political changes. Maduro has come in for tough criticism from President Trump and some Latin American leaders. Through it all, rates of hunger and crime have skyrocketed. In a rare interview, Maduro sat down with NewsHour's special correspondent Ryan Chilcote at an energy summit today in Moscow.
President Trump has upped his criticism of you and your administration since the creation of the Constituent Assembly. And I want to read you a quote from President Trump that he made, a statement that he made at the General Assembly. He said, "The Venezuelan people are starving and their country is collapsing. Their democratic institutions are being destroyed. This situation is completely unacceptable and we cannot stand by and watch." As far as I know, Mr. President, you haven't spoken with President Trump. If you do, what will you say to him, and what would you say now to the American people?
Al pueblo norteamericano nosotros siempre le decimos la verdad.
I would say to the U.S. people the truth, and we've always done so. Venezuela wants only one thing: respect. The time of U.S. interference in the social and political life of Latin America and the Caribbean should be left behind. Venezuela is the object of desire of ruling circles in Washington for two reasons. Our riches, the riches of our country. We have the largest proven reserves of oil in the world. We have growing reserves of natural gas. We are number 8 in terms of gas reserves in the world, and these reserves are growing because on top of oil, we are also exploring some gas deposits. Now, Venezuela raised the flag of a new model of waking up the peoples on our continent, but they want to suppress this idea, this example. It's not just about Trump, because Trump is reading his notes. He doesn't even know where Venezuela is on the map. He doesn't even know where Puerto Rico is. He did not know that. He went to Puerto Rico and he came there during the tragedy and insulted them. These are our brothers. If you say to him Simón Bolívar, he thinks that's a rocker, a singer. He doesn't know who that is. He repeats what the Pentagon writes for him. My voice will never shut up, and my voice will be loud always, with or without Trump. Trump is rude. He is telling me he's going to deal with us and end us. But even with Trump, Venezuela will keep moving forward and will fight for this destiny.
I'd like to ask you about that. President Trump has not ruled out military action in Venezuela. Do you take that threat seriously?
El foro de energía. Me está llenando de energía.
This is a forum on energy. Of course, we can discuss other types of energy, spiritual energy. Let's take a look at this. The president of the largest, the most powerful military power in the world has no right to joke or not be serious. The people of Venezuela are rebellious people. We fight for our freedom. And of course, we have certain threats. Venezuela has no weapons of mass destruction. We have no nuclear weapons, no strategic weapons. We have no significant armed forces or military places abroad. We are a modest country in this sense. And all of a sudden, Trump threatens to attack Venezuela by military force. Of course, all Latin America and Caribbean countries oppose that. And I think the U.S., despite anything, they will have some minimum common sense.
Venezuela has one of the largest collections of Russian arms in the region. Amidst this threat of intervention, you're here in Moscow. Will you be, or are you asking President Putin for military assistance and more weapons?
Ya la tenemos.
As for this Russian assistance, yes. We do have. Russia supports us. Thank goodness there is such a leader in the world, a true leader, with a fast-growing economy like Vladimir Putin. He holds high the flag of peace, dignity.
You are asking for more military assistance, in a word.
Es suficiente lo que tenemos.
We have enough. What we have is enough. But at the same time, there are new arrangements that are coming up, even if we don't ask for it. We are going to be given even more support to defend our sovereignty and our defense capabilities.
According to some statistics, in 2016, around 3/4 of Venezuelans lost an average of 19 pounds because there's not enough food. What are you going to do to solve that problem?
Venezuela mantiene.
Venezuela is still at important positions in spite of the crisis, in spite of the drop in the oil prices, in spite of the domestic trade and economic war that some entrepreneurs fight against us. Venezuela is investing more than 60% of its available resources in quality-based education and healthcare. 65% of students in the country receive free and good quality public education.
Are you saying that there is no food crisis in Venezuela?
I never heard this. Who was saying this? Venezuela is facing a global mass media campaign against it. They have been saying Venezuela has so many problems that he probably deserves an intervention. And people said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Let's do an intervention. Get rid of this MD. Let's get the bad guy. The Caribbean Stalin, as probably some people think. Let's get Mr. Maduro, and that would be the end of problems. This is a global campaign.
As you know, there are concerns about the treatment of journalists. Journalists have been attacked. They have been kicked out of the country. They have been they've been barred from coming in the country. And there are concerns, as you know, about political violence in Venezuela and the question of whether there are going to be elections, presidential elections in 2018. Can you give us a guarantee that journalists will be given access to Venezuela, that there will be presidential elections in 2018, and that demonstrations and protesters will be treated with dignity and without violence?
Bueno, nosotros hemos sufrido durante este año, el mes de abril, mayo, junio y julio.
In April, May, June, and July of this year, we had attacks from the ultra-right movements. No government in the world, I think, would be tolerant of this tight situation and risky situation. So we had to live through very difficult times. This also coincided with the coming to power of the Trump administration and the right-wing powers in the U.S. And there were some spots of violence in Venezuela across the country. And those spots of violence were fueled by journalists and global mass media. The opposition of Venezuela was claiming that we need intervention to stop this violence. Now, if we ever had even one case of a reporter who was not allowed to come and get accreditation in the country, maybe this would have been seen as a violation of our national legislature. But this is probably because of the libel and distortions that were spread by such mass media. Now, from April to July, if we never had any reports in the major newspapers of the world about violence, maybe we would not have had such violence.
Mr. President, I suspect we could go on all day. This has been a very interesting conversation, but I think we're going to need to wrap it up there. I would like to thank you, and please thank the President of Venezuela for joining us today. I thank you, and thank you on behalf of PBS NewsHour. It's been interesting speaking with you, sir.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos. Gracias. Thank you very much. Expansiva.
Migration from Venezuela has been going on for decades. The International Organization for Migration estimates more than 1 million residents have left the country in the past 2 years. Thousands of upper-class Venezuelans left in 1999 after the election of Hugo Chavez. Many others have resisted relocating until now, but are starting to believe the situation has become so dire they might be better off somewhere else. Joining me now from Venezuela is correspondent Stephen Gibbs. He joins us from Caracas. So, Stephen, why are we seeing so many Venezuelans leaving the country now and not before?
Well, I think it's progressive. People have been leaving pretty seriously since 2014. Those numbers have been going up. Why are they leaving, it's a combination of a push and a pull. It's a push, a reason to leave this country, and a pull, a reason to go to other countries. To look at the push, why are they specifically leaving Venezuela? Well, this is a country in many ways economic collapse. It has very, very serious rate of inflation, estimated to be about 100,000% at the moment. There are shortages of basics, including food, and more probably specifically in terms of the migration issue, medicines. If you look at a lot of the people that are leaving, a lot of them are expectant mothers or people with elderly relatives. They feel that they don't trust the public healthcare system here, and so there is a reason to leave. Now, why has there been this acceleration of migration in the last few months and these dramatic images we've been seeing from around the region? Part of the reason for that is that the countries in this region are about to change possibly their migration policies. Until now, it's been relatively easy for Venezuelans without a passport. A lot of Venezuelans travel without passports to enter these countries with just an ID card. Now, the rumor and the reality that that was going to change was an incentive for hundreds of thousands, really, of Venezuelans to take the opportunity they felt they had to escape, as they see it, Venezuela, and go elsewhere.
So, Stephen, that being said, which countries are most likely to admit Venezuelan migrants at this point?
Well, most of this exodus really from Venezuela is west. It's towards the immediate neighbor of Venezuela, which is Colombia. There are around 1 million Venezuelans who, according to the Colombian government, have gone there in the last 12 months or so, between March 2017 and June of this year. The next country they go beyond that is Peru. It has 400,000 Venezuelan migrants, it says, and beyond that, Ecuador with 250,000. So that is the main direction people are going. It's west. The easiest country for them to go to currently is Colombia, because it is the nearest, and also they can travel there and cross the frontier relatively easily without a passport. But what we are seeing more and more is the migrants are going further and further. And we're not just talking about Latin America here. If you look at the United States, it has over 70,000 Venezuelans that are currently seeking asylum. Even Europe, it has over 11,000 Venezuelans that are asking for asylum there.
And we know that regional leaders have been discussing this issue. So what happened in the recent meeting where 13 Latin American countries discussed this issue in Quito?
Well, what this region is attempting to do, the government in this region, really, with the exception of Venezuela, it's not actually taking part in the current meetings. It's trying to have a coordinated approach so that there isn't one particular country that all these migrants head for. It is trying to have a unified system of what it will ask of Venezuelans in terms of passports and ID documents, and then the sort of rights that those Venezuelans will have once they are in these countries. Right now, there's a real problem that, for example, in Colombia or Ecuador and in Peru, Venezuelans, through various means, can get there. They can legally enter. But then there's the whole issue of what sort of status do they have there? How can their children, for example, go to a school in Ecuador? How can their parents, for example, get health care in Colombia? So there's a little bit of a concerted effort amongst these governments to try and have a uniform approach, and also to put pressure on the Venezuelan government to try and prevent this exodus from Venezuela. It is the biggest migration crisis this region has seen in its modern history, and therefore to try and put a lid on this problem that is not just now a problem for Venezuela, but one for the region.
And look, not everyone is leaving. There are plenty of people choosing to stay in Venezuela. So what about them? Why are they staying? Are they still receiving local social benefits? And what does the future hold for them?
Yes, of course. There's no need to exaggerate this. Approximately, we're getting close, perhaps, to sort of 8% of Venezuelans having left since 2014. But of course, the majority stay here. Why do they stay? Well, there's some that can't afford to leave, of course. There are plenty that this is their country. They want to stay here. There is also a substantial number of Venezuelans that are supportive of the government here still. We're looking at over 20%. Now, they are offered social benefits here. That is a principle of the government here. It is really one of the main things it stands for, is that it does offer people social care. In terms of what we mean by that, subsidized housing, free healthcare, free education. But the problem is, in the midst of a very, very serious economic collapse, the sort of quality of that care is diminishing radically. If you go to a public hospital, for example, in Venezuela, one of the issues we've got in this country at the moment is there's a collapse in public services. So many hospitals do not have reliable running water. So that is why many people feel that it's time to give up on the country they, of course, most of them love and would much prefer to stay if they could.
And Stephen, do you get any sense that there's any resentment from neighboring countries that Venezuela's problem is now becoming the region's problem?
Absolutely, and that is an incentive for these meetings amongst the region, because this isn't just a sort of economic and a social problem, it's a political one too. Take, for example, somewhere I was relatively recently, last year I went to the border with Brazil. There you have a substantial number of Venezuelans crossing, much more now than there were when I was there, and that puts a lot of pressure on the social care there. For example, in Pacaraima, the small border town just by the Brazilian frontier, there was a little hospital that's designed for a population of around 4,000. It was dealing with a new expanded population of up to 100,000 people. What is the consequence of that? What happens is you do begin to get xenophobia, where the local people feel that what is really their right to social care, is being taken by people that aren't, in that case, Brazilian. That has big political consequences. And for example, to continue with the example of Brazil, there is a presidential election there next month. One of the points that one of the more right-wing candidates is standing for there is to completely close the border. He is being supported in that argument because of this creeping xenophobia and the problem where the local population resents this sort of exodus from Venezuela, and that is being played out across the region.
And we're also seeing this, the Venezuelans who have come back because they couldn't find what they were looking for in other countries. We've been hearing reports of that. What is happening with them?
Well, that's true. I mean, the Venezuelan government, I should say, does argue that a lot of this migration crisis we're seeing at the moment, they say it has been exaggerated. They argue that this is, and to quote them, they say this is fake news, that they argue that there are plenty of Colombians, for example, that are coming to Venezuela. And as you mentioned, some Venezuelans that have tried to go and have since decided it's not for them. Now, yes, there are some that have taking up Venezuelan government offers to return, but so far the numbers are very small. And, you know, all of the governments around here, they wouldn't be having these meetings, they wouldn't be having these discussions, and we really wouldn't be seeing these pictures if the migration was as two-way as perhaps the Venezuelan government says it is. The majority of people definitely, and I can say this from experience of living in Venezuela, a lot of people are leaving this country. It does seem to be what for many people is their hope, and even a form of protest. They say they're unhappy with the government here, and the way they're going to make their point is to leave the country.
All right, Stephen Gibbs in Venezuela, thank you for joining us on America's Now.
America's Now.
Ya estamos cansados, ya estamos cansados, aquí no hay comida, ¿cómo es posible? Yo, Nelly Hernández, no me callo, así me lleven presa.
Entonces Venezuela es una bomba y esa bomba puede explotar.
Mi nombre es Lilian Tintori, soy esposa de Leopoldo López, un preso político, un preso conciencia que hay en Venezuela hace 2 años y 2 meses. Tengo 37 años, estoy luchando por la libertad no solamente de mi esposo Leopoldo, sino por la libertad de todos los presos políticos que hay en Venezuela. Leopoldo es un preso político porque Leopoldo no ha cometido ningún delito. Lo único que hizo Leopoldo fue alzar su voz y dar unos discursos donde llamaba al cambio para Venezuela. Y por esas palabras y por ese discurso y por ese planteamiento lo metieron preso. Es un preso de conciencia, así lo decretó Amnistía Internacional.
El caso del señor Leopoldo López, por ejemplo, Amnistía ha hecho una evaluación de todo el proceso y había venido haciendo señalamientos respecto a que la detención original podía parecer vinculada o relacionada con el ejercicio de sus derechos humanos, el ejercicio de su derecho a la libertad de expresión, a su condición de líder político de un partido de oposición. Junto con esto, adicionalmente, una serie de señalamientos realizados que podían o que indicaban que los cargos presentados en el caso del señor López estaban motivados políticamente. El año pasado se ha lanzado un llamado mundial en la condición de prisioneros de conciencia de solicitar al Estado venezolano que ponga en libertad inmediatamente y sin condiciones a las personas que han sido consideradas como presos políticos.
Antes de que Leopoldo lo metieran preso, o sea, antes de que él se entregara, 11 veces Nicolás Maduro en cadena nacional dijo que la celda de Leopoldo López estaba lista en la cárcel, que lo iba a meter preso. Es decir, Leopoldo está preso porque Nicolás Maduro le dio la gana de meterlo preso. Nicolás Maduro es el presidente del país y él dijo varias veces, lo voy a meter preso. Articularon, montaron todo un caso para no solamente meter preso a Leopoldo, sino también al alcalde metropolitano Antonio Ledesma, al alcalde de San Cristóbal Daniel Ceballos, y hoy más de 100 presos políticos.
Antonio Ledesma es la segunda autoridad civil de Venezuela. Nos decían días pasados diferentes presidentes con los que hemos estado en contacto que cómo es posible que la segunda autoridad de nuestro país, que el alcalde metropolitano de Venezuela esté preso, que no saben en el mundo entero en qué parte hay un alcalde preso bajo estas circunstancias. Mi esposo es absolutamente un preso político, es un preso de la conciencia de Nicolás Maduro, porque Nicolás Maduro sabe que Antonio Ledesma, su hoja política, no habla sino de democracia. En Venezuela hay presos por tuitear, por decir no me gusta el régimen, están presos. 5 sótanos bajo tierra en un sitio que se llama La Tumba, que por cierto estos que custodian a Antonio Ledesma son los que comandan esta cárcel.
Es muy difícil combinar ser mamá, ser esposa de un preso político y al mismo tiempo asumir la bandera de los derechos humanos. Tengo que organizar muy bien la agenda, tengo que planificarme muy bien, tengo que, ante todo, ser mamá, que es lo más importante, darle el amor y la atención a mis hijos que necesitan para crecer, porque su papá no está, porque le quitaron a su papá, porque Nicolás Maduro y el sistema le quitó a su papá. El trato es muy cruel y muy inhumano, empezando porque es humillante. Si no me desnudo completa y no hago lo que me dice la militar, no entro a ver a mi esposo. Y me lo dicen, si no se desnuda usted no entra. Y la forma en que lo dicen y la forma en que lo hacen delante de muchos militares, dan la orden delante de muchos militares, es humillante. Con todo eso nosotros seguimos fuertes. Aquí en Venezuela no hay democracia, aquí en Venezuela se persigue al que piense distinto y ese modelo no podemos permitir que se repita en ningún país del mundo, ni en Grecia, ni en España, ni en Latinoamérica. Leopoldo escribió un libro que se llama Libre pero preso, porque es como él se siente. Él está preso, pero él está libre en sus pensamientos, porque lo han encarcelado por su palabra. Este proyecto lo hizo con su hermana Diana López, y Diana lo que hizo fue escribir en su piel frases y párrafos que Leopoldo quería contar. Diana escribió su cuerpo, su mamá escribió sus piernas, yo muchas veces también escribí mis piernas con mensajes que él quería contar del libro. Y con esos retazos y con esas fotos de la piel pintada, se logró, Diana hizo un trabajo espectacular y logró armar el libro. Un libro que de verdad dice mucho, un libro que si lo lees conoces a Leopoldo internamente. Y narra, se ve claramente que son pedazos, ¿no? No es un hilo, narra desde que entró a la cárcel, desde que él se entregó y todo lo que ha venido pasando hoy.
Pero a veces yo quedo preocupado por la capacidad de manipulación que tienen por las redes sociales los bandidos estos, que no tienen nombre, los bandidos apátridas que dieron el golpe de Estado, son los mismos de hace 14 años. Ellos creen que haciéndole daño al país, no, va a surgir no sé de dónde, del subsuelo una alfombra roja y los bandiditos y patiquines van a llegar a Miraflores y se van a declarar presidente de Venezuela. Saben ustedes que estamos enfrentando una situación compleja. Una guerra económica que se instaló como modelo de golpe continuado, golpe no convencional, de guerra no convencional. Para tratar de destruir nuestro país, se instaló un sistema de guerra económica. Y ese sistema de guerra económica de sabotaje a los sistemas importadores, productivos y distribuidores de toda la economía nacional. Ustedes saben de qué estoy hablando porque ustedes son trabajadores y sí saben de lo que estoy hablando. Sistema que ha afectado al sector privado en todos sus niveles y estructuras. Y ha afectado al sector público también. A eso se le sumó la guerra del petróleo.
Eso es pésimo. Mire, desde las 5 de la mañana tenemos que andar saltando a ver dónde conseguimos. Y cuando conseguimos 2 harinas pan, si es que la conseguimos, o 2 arroz, o pendejera. Y que, como dice ella, cada 8 días. O sea, que si conseguimos 2 arroz, tenemos que comer con esos 2 arroz hasta los 8 días. 2 harinas pan hasta los 8 días. Esto es terrible, señor. No sabe ni cómo estamos nosotros aquí en Venezuela.
Es una guerra, ¿eh?
Uy, feísimo. Esto quién sabe si es peor. Nunca habíamos pasado por esto. Esto es horrible, horrible.
¿Cuál es la causa?
¿Cuál va a ser la causa? El gobierno. ¿Cuál va a ser la causa? El gobierno que tenemos que nos está matando de hambre. Y mire cómo estamos. ¿Usted cree que es justo? Esta es la tercera edad. Y mire por dónde llega la cola. Ahora lo que no es la tercera edad. Esto es horrible. Y esto es en todo el país completo. Y en todas partes por donde usted se meta a ver el colón grandísimo. Horrible. Ya estamos, mire, hasta aquí. No sé hasta cuándo va a ser esta situación que tenemos. Horrible, horrible.
esperando para que a ver si hay para la comida, porque no hay, lo que nos dan, pues, entonces estamos aquí de personas de las 5 de la mañana, expuestas a que los atraquen, que le hagan un daño, pero bueno, aquí estamos a ver qué es lo que hay, si llega algo, ¿no?
¿Qué quiere comprar usted?
Bueno, lo que nos den, arroz, pasta, harina, lo que consigamos. Sí, nada más hay 2 cosas que nos dan nada más, por persona. 2 harinas, 2 arroz, y el día que nos toca. Porque no vaya a creer que todos los días me toca a mí me toca cada 8 días.
¿Esperar 8 días?
8 días, sí señor, para comprar. Entonces dígame usted, la gente que tiene tanta familia, que sea tan grande, ¿cómo le va a alcanzar 2 harinas pan para toda la semana?
Bueno, para comprar comida que no se sabe qué es lo que se va a comprar. Y todavía hay que continuar haciendo la cola en un sótano para que el gobierno no quede mal o el supermercado.
¿Esperando cuántas horas?
Depende cómo camine la cola. Puede ser 5 horas. Y esta es la cola de las personas de la tercera edad, o sea, personas mayores de 50, 60 años, que tienen que hacer esta cola. Antier se murió un señor de 62 años que salió a hacer la cola el martes, que le dio un infarto de hacer cola o del estrés por hacerla. Esa es la situación, que también pasa con las medicinas, que también hay que hacer cola y no se consiguen.
Ay, demasiado. Yo he hecho hasta colas desde las 3 de la mañana hasta las 8 de la noche. Es horrible. Yo vivo en Katia, en Ruperto Lugo, y tengo que venir hasta acá para poder adquirir los alimentos, ¿entiendes? Uno va a comprar lo que llegue, lo que llegue. Eso no es una cuestión que es seguro, eso es lo que llegue. De repente yo he llegado aquí y no he conseguido nada, pues. Y me he tenido que ir para otro sitio a comprar. ¿Ves? Y esto de comprar por número de cédula tampoco, esto ya parece una guerra, de verdad. Yo pienso que es la mala administración del gobierno. Yo a veces pienso que es una estrategia del gobierno, para que entonces el venezolano esté pendiente nada más de la comida y no esté pendiente de lo que está pasando realmente en el país. ¿Entiendes? Porque aquí lo que hay es que sacar a Maduro del gobierno. Hay que sacar a toda esa gente porque eso no sirve, eso no sirve. Ellos tienen que trabajar de otra manera. Bueno, por ejemplo, el jabón para lavar, ¿verdad? El jabón es difícil porque yo he estado lavando es con jabón líquido y un paquete y un potecito así, nada más un visito así me vale 700 bolívares. A veces he tenido que comprarlos a los bachaqueros y eso es demasiado caro.
Lo primero que hizo este gobierno fue expropiar prácticamente toda la gente que producía y entonces ellos no producen absolutamente nada. Donde se mete el gobierno se echa a perder. Entonces esas son las consecuencias, nosotros estamos pagando las consecuencias de un mal gobierno y eso es todo, un mal gobierno, un pésimo gobierno. Nunca en Venezuela había habido un gobierno como este, ladrones hasta el extremo.
Để nâng cao kỹ năng lãnh đạo của mình và nếu mà muốn tiến xa hơn trong sự nghiệp của mình thì đây là cơ hội tuyệt vời đối với họ.
But leading the project, that will be a very good chance and opportunity to join this program.
Medvedev đã chủ trì nhiều dự án quan trọng, trong đó có cả việc thành công khi đưa được Euro 2020 về với Baku. Nhưng thế không có nghĩa là cô đã hài lòng. Cô vẫn mong sẽ được học hỏi nhiều hơn nữa. Bạn được tham gia các khóa học, những bài thuyết trình của các chuyên gia và các buổi thực hành. Nhờ đó, bạn hiểu thêm về những việc mình làm và tôi nghĩ mình đã học được rất nhiều thứ. Tôi cũng nhận được lời khuyên của các chuyên gia. Đây là sự khích lệ cần thiết cho tôi trong tương lai.
Y hoy por hoy, con las invasiones de Chávez, te quedamos arruinados porque no a las tierras están sin fertilidad, sin hacer nada. Allí no se siembra. Por allí comenzó todo lo que